Yohimbine, what is it? What does it do? Why is it used for fat loss? Why do bodybuilders buy it all the time? And what's its mechanism of action if it really does work? Stay tuned for this video and I'll tell you all about it. Alright, first and foremost, I am not a doctor. I do not pretend to be a doctor. If you are going to try and use Yohimbine, please talk to your doctor. This is not something I recommend people do, and especially not recommend without the advisement of their doctor. This is a supplement just like any other supplement, and you always need to reference your doctor. I'm also not glorifying the use of any sort of drugs, illicit drugs, or illegal substances in this video, and that is for YouTube more than the viewers. Okay, so onward with the video. What is Yohimbine? What does it do? And why do people take it all the time? Yohimbine is advertised as a fat loss supplement. Now, it is advertised as a fat loss supplement specifically because it helps target sex-specific fat areas, or the hard-to-lose fat areas. So, sex-specific fat areas on men are the abdomen and side, or love handles, where we gather fat more often, and women, typically the buttocks and thighs. Now, women have sex-specific fat areas. For childbirth, men, it's just typically a gathering of visceral fat. Now, these fat cells are mainly bound up by what, to my understanding, is alpha-2 adrenergic receptors. Now, Yohimbine has the ability to access these fat cells even with the alpha-2 adrenergic receptors, essentially prohibiting those fat cells from being released. Now, other fat cells around the body do not have these adrenergic receptors, the alpha-2 receptors, so they can just be released when the fat needs to be used. But this essentially has, you can imagine, a second guard on it. It has another bouncer, you might say, before you can get into the club or the bar or whatnot. So what you have to do is you have to have Yohimbine or your ID, and you don't have to have it, but typically what happens is if you don't have Yohimbine, what you do is you use all of the fat around your body, and then the last thing to go will be the hard-to-lose areas, the sex-specific fat area, the hard-to-use areas or the sex-specific fat areas because of these alpha-2 receptors. Yohimbine can make it so that these areas can be lost as easily as the rest of the body. Yohimbine can also stimulate beta subunits. Now what this does is it allows the fat to be burned up more readily. This happens because of an increase in adrenaline, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. Obviously, adrenaline is multiple forms in the body, epinephrine and norepinephrine being the most common because they are the fast-acting adrenaline. Now, Yohimbine is very particular because it will not work if there is a release of insulin around the time of the consumption of the Yohimbine. So the nearest meal is recommended to be 4 hours away from when you consume the Yohimbine. Now, they say technically it could work synergistically with caffeine, but there isn't necessarily any body of evidence to support this. It's just that Yohimbine and caffeine can technically raise how many calories you burn in a day, and therefore, since Yohimbine is unlocking the fat stores in your gut, that you could technically have the caffeine to help burn up those fat stores. Because insulin basically blocks the availability of Yohimbine, it is important that you do not eat around the time of consuming Yohimbine, and if you do, it should be primarily fat and maybe a medium amount of protein. Or what is typically recommended is no food at all. And what you would do is you take Yohimbine more likely in the morning, maybe a fasted cardio around the time so that you have the calorie burn, and therefore fasted cardio, which is usually labeled as not useful or dumb, would actually become useful because you'd be using the Yohimbine to open up the sex-specific fat areas for fat consumption. Yohimbine's peak effects seem to really only last about an hour. I would not recommend redosing Yohimbine unless you have it very well spaced out. Now, Yohimbine has been used in split up dosages throughout the day in fat loss studies and studies to see if its vasodilation effects can help with erectile dysfunction for men, but I would, as per usual, if you're going to do this, have someone who's specified and has qualifications to tell you what to do for your dosing. Speaking of dosing, there is a recommended dosing amount Obviously, this varies from person to person, and it is typically recommended that people start out with a very small amount of Yohimbine, especially if they are sensitive. I happen to be someone who is sensitive, so if I am using Yohimbine, I have to use a lower dosage than people normally use, or I have to wait and build up a sort of tolerance to it. Now, 4 milligrams per 50 pounds of body weight is typically what is recommended. Obviously, I am not a doctor, this is just what I have heard, so please do not go out and do this without any direction from a professional. Another possible fat-burning benefit of Yohimbine is that it can blunt appetite. Much like caffeine or another stimulant, it is seen that it can stop you from craving food. Now, this isn't verified, it has only been noted in certain studies, and it is very oftentimes anecdotally reported. Some people say that the only appetite-suppressing effects they get, however, are from the nausea that Yohimbine causes. This is important to note because if you have a strong nausea or blunted appetite from Yohimbine and you combine it with another stimulant, say caffeine or something else like DMHA, which I would not recommend, I'm just saying let's say you did this because you have a high stim tolerance and your doctor told you it was okay, then you may have extreme nausea and not be able to eat anything, which isn't good for your health. Now, dosing is extremely important, dosaging I should say, because if you go too high, anxiety attacks are almost a guarantee. You will probably end up in the hospital. This is not something to be taken lightly, as people as low as 30 milligrams, which is only 10 above the max recommended 10 milligrams above the max recommended dosage, have gone to the hospital and needed to get anxiety medications to stop them from having anxiety attacks. Now, this should be abundantly clear. If you have any sort of severe mental illness or bipolar disorder, do not take Yohimbine. It will exacerbate it or is extremely likely to exacerbate said illness. Now, another side effect of Yohimbine is it can increase the strain on the heart. If you have high blood pressure, if you have a heart condition, this can exacerbate it. This is why it's important to talk to a doctor and a specialist at that if you can take Yohimbine and if you can take it safely, and obviously go through a scaling up, or as Derek from More Plates, More Dates would say, titration up of the dosaging to make sure that your tolerance is perceived to be decent at every scalable increase. Now, another problem with Yohimbine, which makes people not use it at all, is Yohimbine supplements are not certain to actually contain Yohimbine. There have been studies that have shown, just like SARMs and other chemicals found online and other supplements, they don't actually contain the supplement advertised, or they contain a very low amount, and sometimes they contain too much of the supplement, which is very dangerous, especially for those with heart conditions. And my last point on Yohimbine is, if any of you heard about the stack ephedrine, caffeine, and aspirin, it is said to be relatively similar to the fat-burning effects of ephedrine, caffeine, and aspirin. I cannot necessarily vouch for this, but that is an anecdotal report that I have heard from other people. Now, ephedrine, caffeine, and aspirin is illegal. Yohimbine is legal. And the ephedrine, caffeine, and aspirin is only illegal if it's sold as a supplement. You can still go buy medicated ephedrine, caffeine, and aspirin. I'm not recommending you do this. That was just an explanation that it's still a thing that you can do. Now that I've gone through the empirical, let me talk about my anecdotal experience with Yohimbine. In the past, it has caused me to have some nausea, particularly when taken on an empty stomach. Now, you're not supposed to take this with food, but when I have taken it with food, I've had better results at keeping it down, so to speak, and having less heartburn or nausea. But the effects were obviously completely negated by the fact that I had consumed things that either were carbohydrates or could increase in my insulin in my body. That is my experience, and I would be interested to hear other people's experiences in the comments below. I would also encourage people to do their own investigating, because I am not a doctor and I am not your parents, and I'm not telling you what to do. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please give it a thumbs up if you are on YouTube, and subscribe to my channel. Hit that bell for notifications. And if you are on Rumble, please hit that Rumble button and follow my channel. I hope you guys enjoyed the video again, and I will see you all in the next one.